It's Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. We have 3 cases on the agenda. We'll start with the first, RPC 14059-037, the property located at 671 North Glebe. Mr. Keith McIntosh is here on behalf of the owner, and you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about the property, sir.
Okay, great, thank you. Am I able to share screens?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure. Oh, it looks like that. Okay, looks like I don't have the current driver for the sharing of the screen. So I'm assuming you guys have our submission in front of you. Okay, great. Well, the subject property is a Class A office building, and the assessment increased 9% from $76.4 million to $81.1 million, while at the same time, the property's vacancy increased from about 39,000 to 79,000. In addition to that, there was a tenant that left, which was called Evoke, and that tenant was paying about $52 a square foot on their lease. They were able to get out of the lease, but the new tenant that took over is paying $30 a square foot. So there will be some decline in future incomes as it relates to that specific lease. But basically what we did was we took, this is a building, 222,000 square feet of net rentable area, built in 1998. So when we got the assessor's original worksheet, it was showing 38,000 square feet of vacancy, and we updated that. And that's the only thing we really did to the worksheet. If you scroll to what's called the MMA assessor worksheet. So we simply put the 79,000 vacant square feet into the assessor's worksheet, and then used the assessor's cap rate, arrived at a value of 79 million, and then deducted the lease-up cost to get to 20% vacancy. The actual was 36%. To get to 20% vacancy, we deducted $6 million for rent loss, TIs, commissions, as outlined in the assessor's lease-up deduction. So our overall value comes down to $73,505,119. Also, currently there's 106,000 square feet available. However, some of that is sublet space. Now, we're not including that because that's sublet space, but it does point to an issue that the market is softening, and tenants are downsizing in their space, and it's certainly consistent with what we've seen even from the county's own communications director, that hold on a second here, Ryan Hudson, that basically stated, the 23 values had increased, the commercial property values increased by 2.6% from the previous year. Existing office property values showed a very modest decrease, but were offset by new construction. So overall, assessments in the county went up 2.6% for commercial properties, but that was really related to the new construction. Existing office property declined. And so that pretty much summarizes our position. There's more vacancy in the building based on the sublet space, which I think reflects more risk in the building. And simply using the assessor's worksheet and applying the correct vacancy, that's how we arrived at our value. That summarizes our position.
Okay, thank you. And we have Mr. Chikas for the county speaking on behalf of Mr. Peralta. Mr. Chikas?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. McIntosh. So we are, of course, speaking about 671 Glebe Road. Primarily, we're going to be relying upon the summary sheet. I believe that's page 3 of 128, as well as the rent roll provided by the ownership that will be found on page 114 of 128. I'll ask you to kind of flip between those as we make our case. One of the things we wanted to point out in looking at our value projection for 2023 was that upon the test located in column F, we did erroneously project forward a one-time $500,000 lease termination payment. That would be seen in line 5 of other. That was received in all fairness. Obviously, these are fairly commonplace in longer-term lease options, especially in office properties. As was mentioned by the agent for the owner, the tenants left early. They did pay this lease termination fee. It was received. Again, that is in the income stream and it is appropriate. But as far as projecting it forward, wouldn't make much sense as it is a one-time income. You know, we did make account for that in the sense of if you kind of just strip that out of the income stream as far as looking at stabilization, projecting forward, I still would make the claim that based on the years 2019, 2021, and 2022, even after stripping out that $500,000, that Mr. Peralta is actually right in line with the averages that the property has seen. One thing we'll note too is as we go down sort of top to bottom in column D, the original assessment, you know, Mr. Peralta did in fact note the office space as well as vacant space, and in fact did note that it's a good bit in line with the asking rent for vacant space that the appellant also used. We will also note that as far as the vacancy that was in line at the time, of course, Mr. Peralta wasn't aware of the increase to vacancy, but did note that he started at 25% vacancy, which was a bit higher than what was actually being achieved at the property. The board is aware by now that Mr. Peralta and the department uses fairly large swaths of vacancy, usually 5 percentage points in windows, if you will, to capture what's going on at the property as of January 1. Moving down to total expenses, I think this is one of the cruxes of the case. Mr. Peralta projected operating expenses that are higher than has ever been achieved at this property, even higher than what was achieved in 2019. Almost you know, $450,000 higher than what was achieved in 21, and even with the upswing in 2022, he's still some $350,000, $370,000 higher than what was achieved. You can see that they essentially stabilized their occupancy as their, stabilized their operating expenses as the occupancy stabilized as well. We do have a little bit difference of opinion, I guess, as far as what was vacant as of the date of valuation, because Mr. Peralta's worksheet suggests that on January 2021, the vacant square footage was 77,317. So the idea that it jumped from 77,317 to 79,134, you know, was essentially a fairly small change year over year. In fact, it suggests in 2020, the square footage vacant was 73,000. So it's been a fairly gradual, if not stable, occupancy turn, 73,000, 77,000, 79,000. Again, when we look at the operating expenses that Mr. Peralta projected, as we noted, higher than any of the last 4 years. And in fact, you could note that the operating expenses were actually dropping 19 to 20, 20 to 21. So if we're accounting for the fact that we're projecting the property as stabilized occupancy, I would note that again, we are using 25% vacancy per guideline, but also using a much higher operating expense per square foot rate. I want to look at the rent roll on page 114 briefly. One of the things that the advantage of an office space, even in this fairly glum forecast, is the idea of expected increase in income. That's kind of the principle of commercial. It's that principle of anticipation. Present value is future benefit. So when we look at this rent roll, we can see two major things that have occurred. One was already acknowledged by the agent for the owner. That is the idea that there was a tenant that left and someone took their space. It was for a good bit less per square foot rate. But I would also note and ask the board members to note that that's a temporary stopgap, if you will. They're paying approximately $30 for the first 2 years, and that jumps to near $49 in its second 2 years. So you do a net effective rent on that, and you can see that it's fairly in line with what else is being achieved at the property. As board members are also prone to know, almost all of these leases that are in place have escalations of 2.5% to 3% per year. So even as we talk about these projections made by Mr. Peralta, all of these have gone up by at least 2.5% or 3%. Furthermore, that free rent, that abatement period of free rent burns off as well. So the gross projected by the appellants on page 114 in the lower left-hand column shows a negative rent abatement of just over $750,000. That burns off, and that will be rent received in this year of 2023. So we do believe, based on these facts, looking at, again, a well-placed property at Boston Metro, Boston Mall, we have the Boston Exchange, which has actually been doing quite well with the lease up. And we look at this property, we do acknowledge, again, that we saw a continuation of a slight uptick in vacancy. Again, I would acknowledge that Mr. Peralta had noted that 25% as of January 1st. He also, again, made quite a bit of a jump on projections for operating expense, but I would argue that that works in the county's favor. As we've seen before with other property types, if you're to make an adjustment to one column, we would ask you to obviously look at making an adjustment to the others. In this case, Mr. Peralta's income adjustment, even based on the projection for gross potential alone, not including the gross potential for the vacant space, is already some $600,000 lower than what the owner himself suggests they will receive. Again, as that free rent burns off. Looking at the stabilized property, even again, if you were to take off that $500,000 of lease termination, look at the averages of this property, look at the averages of the effective gross that's been received, look at the averages of the operating expenses that have been incurred, and you will see that Mr. Peralta was actually even a bit low with his original January 1 assessment. We believe that the county should be confirmed at $81,115,913. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Questions from the board members? Mr. Hoffman?
I'm curious about the E-Trade lease, like what the situation, because you guys are talking about occupancy, and I don't know, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but like when I look in, you can see from the outside in the windows of that building, and it looks like it's empty space like all the time. So can you, for the appellant, can you kind of elaborate? Is this building kind of like they're paying the rent, but they're not showing up? Is that the situation?
The largest tenant is E-Trade, and they've been downsizing over the years. And they have the space out for sublet. And so they're not getting the space leased up. They're not, they'd like to be out of the building and downsized. But that's really what's happening. It's the downsizing. So there's about 40,000 feet currently, in addition to what was vacant at the date of value, another 40,000 feet of sublet space. So almost half of the building, up 45% of the building is empty.
Physical occupancy.
Physical occupancy.
Right. Yeah, okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Yates?
Just to be sure, the tenant that went, the space that went to $30 from $50, that's directly with the owner versus a sublet.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Penaranda, anything?
No, I don't have any.
Wait,
Okay. Oh, Mr. Hoffman again.
I just wanted to make sure, because Chris said that there was a lease termination fee of $500,000. Was that the $500,000 or was it the whole 547,727 that's in column F?
547.
It was the 547. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
I will. It's not to speak on the office sector as a whole, but to kind of continue on with what Mr. Hoffman was speaking about, one could look at this as a good situation for the owner, whereby he has income coming in and less operating expenses. If we're going to look at that and again make an adjustment, please note that Mr. Peralta already has and then some. His operating expense projection is higher than, again, what was achieved in 2019, near $370,000 higher than what was achieved last year. The county's made adjustments to large swaths of vacancy. Again, we've done that as far as below-line adjustments when needed. We do believe that based on the overly gross projections of operating expenses, any adjustment made would still be in line with what's been achieved historically as far as the NOI. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McIntosh, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Sure. If you look at the NOI from calendar year 19, 20, 21, it's just a decline, 6.6 in 2019, 6.1 in 2020, 5.5 in 21. And if you take out the prepayment, the lease termination fee, the NOI in 22 would have been around 5.3 million. So it's just a continual decline, lots of vacant space. I think, is not, I don't believe is a benefit to the owner. That's all.
Okay, thank you both. It's just among the board members. Where is everybody? Mr. Hoffman.
I'm just doing the math, but I think you should take the termination payment out of the NOI calculation.
I'm sorry?
I think we should take the termination payment out of the NOI calculation, not operating income. So I'm doing the math on the county's test, just to see where that lands. Not a recurring income stream.
Right, I guess, while you're doing that, I'll just kind of make a couple comments. I guess my concern is, I think Mr. Chikas, made a good point. When you look at the reduction that the appellant is using for income, projection, and then taking the higher vacancy on top of it, I think that more than compensates what's actually happened. I mean, if you look at, I agree that from the appellant standpoint that, the NOI is going down. But the county used 5.5, the appellant's pro forma for 2022 was, 5.4. I mean, so I think that that's pretty close there. And then when you look at the actual operating for 2022, it's at 5.8. I mean, we've more than taken out the termination, the $500,000 of the termination fee. So, I don't know. I'm not feeling inclined to reduce, but go ahead, Mr. Penaranda.
That's pretty much the way I was looking at it. I think the numbers actually compensate any other fee that was charged.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking pretty much at the operating numbers for two, and I think Mr. Peralta did them a favor to come up with the numbers that he did.
Right, and the expenses are higher than what was reported. So, I mean, those two things alone, to me, compensate for that termination fee.
Right.
Mr. Yates?
Well, I saw exactly what you had stated too, but the only thing I saw is the adjustments below the line, or there's some differences there. I don't think the county's that far off of what the building's worth.
Mm-hmm.
Below the line space.
Well, in the original, there wasn't below the line, but it's still lower than
It's lower than the county's revised.
Revised, yeah, no, I agree. Mr. Hoffman, so where are you on this?
It comes out right about where the appellant was, 73, 538, 438. So that would be if you just took that one-time payment out of the NOI, kept everything else the same.
Right, but can you look at between what they actually achieved and what the county used in column D? That's less than what they actually achieved in reducing that $500,000.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be at 5.3 in NOI, and 21 it was 5.6. I mean, this building is a ticking time bomb, right? If it wasn't for the $4.5 million coming from E-Trade every year, it would be worth less than $100 a square foot today.
Mhm.
So you've got 5 more years of positive NOI, and this tenant, it sounds like there's no intention to renew whatsoever. Even if they did, they're above market right now because they've been escalating these rents since 2001. Tech bubble lease time. So yeah, I mean, to me, if it wasn't for E-Trade, this thing's on the market, or they're handing back the keys, or the lender's coming and looking for a bunch of money. So E-Trade in there is, $80 to $90 a square foot present value in their lease payments. So if you took $82, I mean, if you took the E-Trade out of it, you're at $237 a square foot. I don't think the building sells for that without E-Trade. So I mean, I'm inclined to go with either the appellant or take the county's column F and just take that one-time lease payment out for termination. Get the same number.
Thing is that we can't look into 5 years from now. I mean, we have to
Yeah.
look at what's happening now. But
Isn't this a discounted cash flow? I mean, aren't we looking at present value of future cash flow streams?
I don't think we're looking at discounted cash flow.
What do you think a cap rate is?
So
I mean, it's just a shorthand version of taking the forward cash flow streams and discounting them back to present. That's what we're doing. I mean, I don't think I have the support for it, so I'm just going to speak my case
Yeah, no.
there. Yeah, and we can move on from there.
Yeah,
Yes,
because I just look at the column F. If you look at 9.7 million versus the original assessment 9.2, to me, there's the $500,000.
Yeah.
So.
To argue that, and I agree that E-Trade's not going to fall, but that's also down the road. There's revenue value in the building now at these numbers. Is it going to hold continually? No.
Yeah.
But
Give it a little
that's, yeah, giving, and if we lower it based on that kind of thinking now, what's going to happen next year and the year after until it actually does catch up? Because I think I agree with you, but it's not, I don't think
Right.
that's determining the value.
Yeah. Problem.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Penarano, are you okay with that then?
I'm okay with with the assessment.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to move to confirm the county's original assessment of $81,115,900. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Penaranda is the second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it is 3-1 without Mr. Hoffman. The county is confirmed at $81,115,900. Okay, moving to the second case, RPC 180260012, 3003 Washington Boulevard. Mr. McIntosh, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Sure. It's a Class A office building with long-term leases in the property. Which gets a little tricky when you're using a direct cap against a property that has long-term leases. you sort of have to go to discounted cash flow analysis because, you know, to go to market and the market rate of leases, you know, you have to assume moving those existing tenants out. So the property has an appraisal on it that was done not for these purposes, but for their own internal purposes with a data value of 7/31/2022 for $151,250,000. So what we did was to look at in our income analysis and number two, if you look at the assessment per square foot, it is $761. There hasn't been a sale in the county that even approaches that number. So it begs the question: is this, you know, really about attempting to just take the lease fee income and capitalize that using direct cap? I think there's some flaw in that analysis. So what we did was we took the property, leased it up at market rents. You know, they're getting our, you know, on that, you know, in the potential gross, they're getting about $68 a square foot, and basically on long-term leases. So what I did was take the market rents for the retail and office space at $40 for office, $48 for retail. I added pass-throughs. I took a 5% vacancy rate, which is again aggressive in this market, and capitalized it at the 6.5 assessor cap rate, and I get to $118,595,114, which is about $562 a foot, which will represent one of the high sales. Then what we did was to look at the above market leases. So I took the current market and I added the value, the present value of the income stream from the above market leases, so the differential between the two, and added that to the market approach of 118 million. And that got me to 147,700,000, or just about $700 a square foot. I think that's really aggressive. However, again, you know, if you look at CoStar, you look at even the county's description from the communication director about assessments and market value, you know, where existing office properties had modest decreases in value. That's consistent with the market and consistent with the forecast. You know, market rents for Class A office space are $42 and declining. And so again, there are no sales. I mean, you look at the assessor's report, there are no sales. They list everything. They don't specify any specific sales to support, you know, the value. I think the appraisal that was done for their own internal purposes to keep track of their investment is well supported at 151 million. You know, taking a market approach and then adding the differential and using the assessor's cap, I think it's a valid approach to determine a value, and that's 147 million or $700 a square foot, which is pretty high. That pretty much summarizes our position.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. So again, primarily relying upon the summary sheet, page 4 of, what is it, 438. You know, we'll just be honest right off the bat, we blew this one. We're very low. If you look at last year's assessment to what this one grew, this grew by $40,000, 0.02% year over year. When we look at this property left to right, this is almost the opposite of the last property in the sense that it's increased its occupancy. It's now fully occupied. So when we're looking left to right, the gross potential, Mr. Peralta is barely above the gross potential that was achieved in 2019. Again, focusing on our column D. As far as effective gross, because Mr. Peralta did make a market adjustment and allowed for 5% vacancy that doesn't exist at the property, he's actually lower than what was achieved at the property in 2019, some $500,000 lower than what was achieved in 2022. And that's after accounting for $1.2 million in free rent. Conversely, from last case, we're a bit low on the operating expense projection, but again, as the board has seen time and again, where you make one adjustment, we'd ask you to look at the other metrics. You know, if you were to even adjust that by 500,000 to match what was achieved last year, you'd still need to make up some $600,000 or $700,000 of effective gross income that Mr. Peralta, the county, unfortunately left on the plate, if you will. Again, this building is completely leased up and for the next 11 years. You know, that's one of the arguments we would actually make against using discounted cash flow. Virginia courts agree. It's just too assumptive filled to look down the pipe and see what's going to happen in 5 years. If we were to do that with the last building, we'd have one assumptive. If we do it on this one, we'd say they're going to be making even more money year after year after year after year after year. If that's the case, then again, we're low. You can see that the projection made for the NOI is actually even lower than what was achieved last year alone, let alone looking at the averages of the property and the fact that it's grown. It grew some 600,000 in 2022, over $1 million in 2021. And again, it did seem to go down, but we would argue that that's again is making a concession, a full allotment concession of 1.2 million of free rent. So all this being said, it's a well-situated property. Again, Boston Quarter, metro accessible, fully leased for the next 13 years by a good tenant. We again would argue that we have made a market adjustment of $5 million, over $500,000 of gross potential that's taking off what would be expected, even though we know it's fully leased. Given the extremely low projections made by the county for gross potential, subsequent effective gross, and resultant net operating income, we do recommend the board confirms the property at $160,605,435,000. Again, an increase of 0.02% over last year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? Okay, Mr. Hoffman?
Is this CNA, is CNA Corporation, or is this the insurance company, CNA? For the appellant?
Yeah, it's a CNA corporation.
Okay, all right.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, any final comments, Mr. Cheekas?
No, ma'am.
Okay, any final comments in your minute wrap-up, Mr. McIntosh?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, to use, you know, to say that the discounted cash flow analysis, which is predominantly used by the investor community, is not viable. Is a little far-fetched. I mean, I believe the assessor mentions that the Arlington County's attorney's office stated that DCF is usually thrown out. I mean, probably for buildings that are multi-tenanted with you know, changing leases and shorter term leases. And that, you know, so usually doesn't, you know, not final to me. I mean, I think this is a good candidate for looking at it from a discounted cash flow perspective. It's how the investor community looks at it, and that's all. And that, you know, it's a different animal than a building that's got vacancy and rolling leases, and it's longer term investment. So cap rates are different, discount rates are different. I think you got to look at it from a discounted cash flow analysis.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, where is everybody on this? It's just among the board members. Mr. Penaranda?
I'll go ahead and start. I think this case is even more clear than the previous one that, you know, the numbers that the county used are just are low in my opinion. Starting from the income, CPI, the NOI, everything is just lower than anything else that has been achieved. So I'm more than okay then with the current assessment.
Mhm. Mr. Yates?
I'm okay with the county. I understand the appellant's position, but I could not set value based on what the rest of the market is. It's about what this building is. And this building has a lot of leases going to 2034. If we were down the road, if this was 10 years from now, it'd be a totally different discussion.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, I mean, this is also the building that's occupied. It's not like
And gonna be that way.
empty and CNA is just writing the check because they're ready to get out of there. I mean, it's pretty stable. And I think maybe Rob is a little bit less aggressive on some of the numbers because then you start bumping up against square foot prices that are like, we haven't seen a $900 square foot office comp in Arlington ever. So it becomes very difficult to kind of justify those numbers. That's where the appraisers are kind of looking at too. On the they're around 717. So yeah, I mean, to me, this one's not as bad. So I can actually.
Okay, would somebody like to make a motion?
I'll go ahead and move that we confirm the assessment of 160,605,400.
Okay, motion and a second by Mr. Yates. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county is confirmed at 160,605,400. And the last case on our agenda is RPC 1802613 at 3001 Washington Boulevard. Mr. McIntosh, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Okay, so it's pretty much the same owner, very similar circumstances, long-term leases. This value, this assessment went up. This assessment went up by 9%. Cap rate stayed the same. The NOI went up by $59,000 or 1.27%. So same cap rate last year at 6.9 against income that went up $60,000 doesn't get you a 9% increase. I mean, so that's the main issue we have. We have an appraisal by an MAI at 7/31/22 using discounted cash flow analysis at $60,300,000, pretty consistent with the prior year assessment of 59. We saw that in the last case, the property, the value pretty much stayed the same. This property went from 59 to 64 million, while the income, increased very slightly. We did the same approach, used market rents, get to a market value using the assessor's cap, on a direct cap. This is what might be done in an economic basis and sort of mass appraising basis, a $545 a square foot at a 6.5 cap gets you to $51 million. And then we value those above market leases at 7.6 million. And that pretty much gets us back to the 59 million that the assessment was last year. As your communications director indicated, the values, for existing office buildings were down. The income, went up ever so slightly based on the actual. It was 4,694,027 in calendar year 21, and it was 4,753,702 in calendar year 22. So basically $59,000. You cap that at 6.9. I don't know, that works out to maybe $800,000 in value. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. So this one's not quite as clear cut, but we do believe it is fairly succinct. Again, we'll focus on page 4 of 286, the summary sheets. Again, as Mr. McIntosh well summarized, this is essentially sister building, well amenitized, and again, well occupied, a fully occupied building. Most of these leases are not quite as robust and in place for the next 11 plus years, but 3 to 8 years for the most part. So again, well tenanted. Mr. Peralta, the county was a bit more aggressive this go around as far as our projections, but still, if we're looking at the history that's been achieved, we're still low. We're lower than what was achieved in 2020, 2021, and 2022 as far as gross potential. Again, a market adjustment of over $250,000 was made. 5% of non-existent vacancy was added to the property to essentially make that market adjustment to that effective gross that's listed. When you look at that effective gross, please note that it's barely above what was achieved in 2020 and lower than what was achieved in 2021. And again, a good bit, $600,000 lower than what was achieved in 2022. Mr. Peralta was actually fairly in line with his operating expense projection. I would point out to the board that unlike the previous case, these operating expenses are actually going up year over year over year. Just as we did in the last case, and as we talked about in previous cases, if you're to look at making an adjustment, and in fact, as you note in column F, Mr. Peralta did in fact make an adjustment to test that increased operating expense percentage, and still was lower than the effective gross that's being achieved at the property, not only annually, but historically. We ask you again to adopt the idea when assessment, 1 year does not assessment make, look at the history of this property, the increasing income, even as noted by the appellant, even if it's modest. We would note that that modest income was due to a rather large increase in operating expense, which was a one-time event. It was fairly smooth from years 2019 to 2021. But we saw, $125,000 increase to maintenance repair. Unfortunately, Mr. Peralta is not here to speak if he was engaged with the owner as far as what that would be attributable to. But again, if you look at the historical operating for maintenance repairs subtotal, you see that it was very stable, almost the exact same amount from 2019 to 2020, and then actually dropped in 2021. So the spike in 2022 would be something I would have asked about. It's not to say it's not a allowable expense. It's just a matter of figuring out what's a reasonable projection for next year. As Mr. Peralta did test in column F, again, you can see that he did make an upward projection for operating expense, and it still called for a confirmation of what was put out January 1st. Based on the rent rolls in place, the increasing income stream due to that occupancy in place, based on the low projections made by the county and based on the history of the property, we do ask that the board confirms the original assessment of $64,623,800. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? Okay, any final comments, Mr. Chikas?
No, ma'am.
Okay, Mr. McIntosh, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Nothing, thank you.
Nothing. Okay. All righty, it's just among the board members. Where's everybody here? Mr. Penaranda?
As in the previous case, I'm okay with the current assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I would have made an adjustment on the expenses, but I think all the other numbers compensate.
Yeah, I agree. Anything different from anybody else?
No, it's basically an extension of the other building. It shouldn't be that far off.
Okay, does somebody want to make an emotion?
I'll go ahead and move again that we confirm the assessment of $64,623,800.
All right, I'll second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment of $64,623,800 is confirmed.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Thank you, board members.
Okay, that concludes the agenda. Does anybody have any business? All right, then we will stand adjourned at 10 o'clock, re-adjourn tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And remember, it is virtual for everybody. Okay. Rosa?
Yes, ma'am.